All right, we are going to go ahead and get started today. So good afternoon, families. My name is Heather Deer. I am the Assistant Director of Parent and Family Programs. I am happy to welcome you to our family webinar series. Our webinar series is designed to provide you with timely information about the student experience and opportunities your student may take advantage of. Our session today includes a discussion about confidence and the coronavirus that will last approximately 30 minutes. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for you to ask questions. We ask that you keep your microphones muted for the duration of the presentation in order to maintain the best sound quality for all attendees. We have learned that the best way for you to communicate your questions is to send them via the Q&A feature in Zoom. You will find this feature at the bottom of your screen labeled Q&A. You can type your questions here. Feel free to submit questions during the discussion. I will serve as the moderator and ask our presenter as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation. Please keep in mind, if you have specific questions regarding William & Mary's interim policies or questions about your students specifically, please send these via email to families@wm.edu, and we will be happy to answer these questions after the presentation. At this time, I would like to introduce you to our presenter, Peter Atwater. Peter Atwater is a William & Mary alumni, parent, and a pioneer in the developing field of confidence-driven decision-making. In addition to teaching a freshman COLL 150 class on the topic, he serves as a consultant to corporations and institutional investors, helping them to better understand the impact of changing confidence on consumer preferences, decisions, and actions. Earlier this spring, we had asked Peter to share his thoughts on confidence-driven decision-making with all of you, but given the recent developments on campus and around the world, he has graciously agreed to instead focus specifically on the outbreak. Today, Peter will discuss why we are naturally panicking and what he sees ahead, given his experience and research with other major crises in confidence. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us today and being so flexible during this time, and we're excited to have you with us. Peter?
Thank you, Heather. I'm delighted to be here. I wish the circumstances were different, but I hope that through this conversation today, it'll help you to better understand why we're all feeling so anxious. So I need to get my screen up, and hopefully that will now happen. There we go. So, as Heather mentioned, I teach a class on campus. It's a COLL 150 class on confidence and decision making. And at its core, it's intended to help students understand that we act as we feel. And while our class is in the economics department, we talk about all sorts of behavior, whether it's economic, cultural, political, social. We look at the linkages between how we feel in every dimension. For example, early in the semester, we talk about music and the fact that we naturally listen to sad, depressing music when we are blue, and that we dance to Pharrell when things are good. And as I always tell investors, you want to buy Adele and sell Pharrell. We also spend time looking at politics and the relationship between our mood and our level of confidence. What I've just put up is a chart of Gallup's Economic Confidence Index. This is a measure that Gallup, the polling company, does on a regular basis, and it looks at mood of how people feel about the economy. And this is from 2015 through 2016. And I think you can see there's a pretty clear trend line to this green line. You'll notice, though, that there's a similar trend line in the blue line above. The two seem to mirror each other closely. You might be surprised to learn that that blue line above was Hillary Clinton's popularity. Political candidates wane, their popularity waxes and wanes based on how we feel. And as confidence fell into the 2016 election, now President Trump did much better in the polls. You might be interested to see, for example, that more recently, the yellow line above is Bernie Sanders' popularity. And you'll notice it has a striking resemblance to the stock price of Tesla. We wouldn't normally put those things together, but when you look at it through the lens of confidence, there are lots of similarities between Elon Musk and Bernie Sanders that weigh differently depending on our mood. Not surprisingly, since the crisis has developed, someone like Joe Biden has soared in popularity relative to Bernie Sanders. So why am I saying all of this? I think because in many ways we look at confidence, but we misunderstand it. One of the things that I learned early on in the semester is that my students believe that confidence looks like LeBron James, Beyonce, Bill Gates, and Donald Trump. Nothing could be further than the truth. Confidence is actually cognitive. It's how we think. It's why we think what we do. When our confidence is high, our brain is relaxed. And this is sort of, if you were to get inside our brain when we're highly confident, this is how we perceive the world. It's easy, it's straightforward, there's not a cloud in the sky. I'd like to think of it that when we're confident, our brain is just, it's like the Staples button. Everything is easy. As our confidence falls, though, and we become cognitively strained, suddenly it starts to look like this. And when confidence really falls, our minds get overwhelmed by complexity. And this is sort of what I imagine our brain looks like when we're very, very uncertain, kind of like today. Our level of confidence is a function of how we feel about how we perceive ourselves handling the future. And that's a mouthful. So let me sort of step back and divide it into some pieces. First of all, confidence is perception-based. There are no truths or facts to our level of confidence. It's all based on the stories we tell ourselves. And we can turn facts into stories faster than anyone else. That's how we digest information. Behind those perceptions, though, are two requirements. One is that we perceive certainty in the world around us, that there's a sense of predictability, that we think we can forecast what it looks like, feels like, tastes like. The other piece is that we have an element of control, that we feel a sense of powerfulness that goes along with it. Confidence is, again, two-dimensional. We need both of these. I can take these two words and I'm going to turn them into a quadrant that I use a lot. It's got certainty across the bottom, low and high, control along the y-axis, low and high as well. I use this quadrant a lot in terms of mapping behaviors, understanding how people feel, what they do. And I think in a situation like this, it's really helpful. So let me talk a little bit more about the quadrant itself. The upper right-hand quadrant, or corner of it, is what I think of as our comfort zone. These are environments where we perceive a high sense of certainty and a high sense of control. And we love that box. That box feels familiar, it makes us feel at ease. And again, cognitively, it doesn't require a lot of effort. Again, that sense that things are straightforward. The lower left-hand quadrant box in the quadrant is our discomfort zone. Those are environments where we have low certainty and low control. Again, sort of feels like this to us. And when things get really low, where we feel no sense of certainty and no sense of control, I think of that as sort of the trauma zone. It's that feeling that we have if we've been rushed to the emergency room, where we don't know what's going on, we feel powerless, we feel incredibly vulnerable. In fairness, though, there's the fearless zone at the other end of the spectrum, where we feel total certainty and total control. That's that sense of sort of when you decide that you're going skydiving. I want to just cover very quickly the other two boxes in the quadrant, because I think you'll help to understand why we need both. Environments of high certainty and low control are an airplane. Unless you're flying the plane yourself, this is a situation where you have high certainty, or at least you certainly hope so, but you have no control. That's a positive environment. Prisons are similar. Again, environments of high certainty, no control. But I hope what you sense from both of those is that these are environments where the certainty must be extreme. You would never get on an airplane in an environment where confidence in your sense of certainty is not assured. The other box is a casino. That's an environment where we have high control but low certainty. Games of chance all fit in that box. So why am I mentioning this? I'm raising it because in our lives, we naturally move from box to box. For example, if we book a plane trip, we buy a ticket, we're highly confident about where we're going. We get to the airport, we start to board the plane, our anxiety starts to rise, we taxi to the runway. People who don't like to fly suddenly feel very vulnerable as we take off. Add a little turbulence, and the whole plane moves to the lower left. And when there's lightning rolling down the aisle, everybody in the plane suddenly has become quite prayerful, and it's that sense of trauma. Thankfully, on an airplane ride, the landing, by the time we've landed and returned to the gate, that sense of certainty and control has been restored. Our lives naturally go through all of these different boxes at different times. And I think sometimes we forget that in moments like this. We've been in that lower left box before. Coming into the crisis, I would have put and did put a view out there that we were invincible. There was a sense of invincibility in early February that was palpable. I saw it in measures like this one, again from Gallup, where a record low number of Americans were concerned about the economy. Investors, particularly small retail investors, were back in the market in a big way. I had students coming up to me between classes asking about particular stocks. I think it's also significant that that sense of invincibility was shared in the White House. Presidents are only as good as we feel. And so I think it's significant coming into this that the president, reflecting and mirroring the invincibility of many Americans, was also in that upper right-hand box. There was also a sense of doubt, particularly among Republicans. And here we hadn't even had the 2020 election, and folks were looking ahead to 2024. Why did that matter to me? Well, I'd seen this before. Hillary Clinton, that sense of invincibility, and the introduction of Jeb Bush to the 2016 campaign. Both of those significant peaks. In fact, Hillary Clinton's popularity never rose above that Time magazine cover. So a few weeks ago, we were feeling invincible. Unfortunately, invincible also equals fragile. As I said to the folks on Marketplace the other night, confidence is like a Lego tower. The more we build it higher and higher, the more fragile it becomes. And anybody who's watched Lego Masters recently has seen that the taller we make it, the more vulnerable it becomes. When we are extremely confident, we naturally underappreciate risks. And so prior to the outbreak, it shouldn't be all that surprising that we took great comfort in the concept that the virus was contained in China. That's how we saw it. That's what we believed to be true. Over the month of February, you started to see confidence being challenged as American multinationals were impacted, then investors in those companies were impacted. But there was a big drop in confidence when the virus was identified as having broken out in Italy. And that's really significant when we think about how we perceive threats. Our threat perception is related to the psychological distance we see ourselves from the threat. The further away it is, we think it is from us, the less anxious we are about it. As it becomes closer and we perceive it to be closer, our anxiety rises. And exponentially, as it gets closer and closer in psychological distance. I think what we saw earlier this spring was that as the distance between us and the virus rose, our anxiety started to rise. We went from it was contained in China to it's in Italy. And you'll notice that it's not a linear rise. As it gets closer and closer, anxiety rises exponentially. And I think we can all attest to the fact that we've been feeling that more and more. So over the last few weeks, I've watched as the virus our perceptions has moved from the viruses in Italy to the viruses coming to America, the viruses in America, to now the viruses near me. And not surprisingly, with that, our perception of distance has evaporated and our anxiety has soared. We've gone from invincible to feeling intensely vulnerable very quickly. For many people, this is going to feel like you were mugged. That sudden involuntary sort of dislocation from feeling really, really confident to feeling intensely vulnerable. That's a phenomenon that I hear repeated very often when I'm talking to people who've experienced major trauma, that they've gone somehow from feeling extremely confident to feeling without certainty and without control and intensely vulnerable somehow overnight. I think we're about here now. In fact, we could be even higher. It's sort of, mapping this specifically is hard, but I think we are very, very close to a point where everyone feels that the virus is physically incredibly close to them. What is so interesting today is that we now have tools that allow us to see this in real time. So the chart above is Google search data for the coronavirus symptoms, that phrase. And what you can see is that it's spiked exponentially, mirroring exactly that sense of psychological distance, that chart that I had above. All I've done is to insert a mirror image. We've seen the same thing with the financial markets, that as the anxiety has become intense, the markets have sold off increasingly in greater and greater percentage terms. As I said, this is where I think we are. We are at a point where the anxiety is extreme, the psychological distance is very small. We are in that lower left-hand corner of the confidence quadrant where things feel intensely vulnerable. I hope visualizing this is helpful because in all of these cases, my movement across this quadrant naturally changes what we think, how we feel, and therefore how we act. I was struck yesterday by this headline in the Wall Street Journal that most Americans say the worst is yet to come. I suspect that most Wall Street Journal readers nodded their heads and said, yep, that's right. And that sort of reinforced how they feel. I, as a researcher, though, took a lot of comfort in that because that perception that the worst is yet to come is something that I see at major lows in confidence. We always feel that things are going to be worse ahead when confidence bottoms. In the same way, when confidence peaks, we feel the best is yet to come. If I look back in history, it feels to me like we are rapidly approaching, if we've not already landed upon, the same sort of environment as when Lehman Brothers collapsed. One of the great misperceptions I think people have about the collapse of Lehman Brothers is that it didn't mark the beginning of the banking crisis. It actually occurred at the very, very low point in confidence. Confidence from then until now has never been lower. Bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, its failure reflected hopelessness, collective hopelessness, what we naturally see at lows in confidence. But I also want to point out that the rise in confidence over the next several months was tenuous, that it rose, it fell, it rose, it fell, it rose, it fell in a very narrow band around that low point. And that's very, very consistent with other lows in confidence. When confidence is at its bottom point, it's still very fragile. We feel very vulnerable. I think that sort of fragility, though, leads to actions. And the kinds of actions that I've been looking for, particularly around the virus, have been, sweeping policymaker response. These are the environments where city, state, federal government officials do things to respond to the sense of vulnerability of the people they serve. These are also the points where you see people who have sort of fought the belief in whatever the issue was, they finally capitulate. These are where people in the stock market, this is where retail investors naturally sell at the lows. In this case, I think it's also being reflected, and I anticipated this in terms of there being massive closures. We've gone from canceling events to closing things to ensure that the outbreak can be contained. What I'm beginning to see is that worst is yet to come is believed widespread, and that people are now acting on it. You see that in terms of the hoarding in the supermarkets. You're seeing it now as policymakers are taking a dramatically different tone to the outbreak. States and cities are closing things. There is a sense that things are going to get worse before they get better. I don't pretend to know whether the low has happened, will happen in the next week, or will happen in the next couple of weeks. But I feel very confident in the fact that we are nearing the end of panic. Panic is really hard for us to sustain. It exhausts us. It uses up lots of energy. And so I think we are at this low point in this lower left-hand corner of the lower left-hand quadrant, and that we're going to begin to move slightly up. And it's going to be sort of like learning to ride a bicycle again. These are where we begin to learn how to rebuild confidence. Think of this as being physically injured, where you're learning to walk again after you've gotten a broken leg. That's what that lower left-hand quadrant feels like. And as I said, that's what we experienced coming out of the banking crisis. One of the things, though, about this environment is you'll notice that the green bars I've drawn so far as being even. These boxes are of even size. That's not the case in terms of our perception. When our confidence is really high, we perceive the vast majority of the world around us as having high certainty and high control. Today, though, given the vulnerability that we feel, we perceive the world around us as being extremely uncertain, and we feel very powerless to a disproportionate level. Again, these are perceptions. These are not reality. The world really hasn't changed much in the last couple of weeks. What's changed dramatically to me is that we've gone from an environment that looks and feels like this in terms of our perceptions to an environment that now looks like this. One of the things that will come from this, and we've seen it already, is that our preferences and all of our actions have now taken on a very different dimension. When confidence is low, we experience what I call me here now thinking. The things that we value, the things that we find most important, all tie to close physical, temporal, time, distance, relationships. Our world around us shrinks to things that feel most important, most essential, most predictable, understandable to us. This is a cognitive reaction to the stress and strain of that mounting uncertainty that we see. We are very much in me here now mode. You can see it in terms of lots of behaviors, and this is contrast to that us everywhere forever mindset that we had just a few months ago. When confidence is really high, we embrace uncertainty. We enjoy things that are unfamiliar, unpredictable. Complexity, innovation are warmly embraced. That's not today. A few weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal had this image in the paper, and I thought it was really striking. That The blue images above were companies that were doing really well. Companies like Domino's Pizza, Clorox. It's not mentioned here, but Netflix. The below were companies that, the airlines, the cruise companies. And I think you were actually able to see in real time that change in preference, that me here now decision to, order in pizza and make sure everything was spotlessly clean around us versus, travel and moving things, that were far in distance from us. I think right now we're experiencing intense me here now thinking. And so we need to recognize and appreciate the consequences of that. There are things that are going to be naturally hard when we're in me here now mode. We will be naturally less generous. And by that, I don't mean just financially generous, but socially generously too. We are more likely to exclude people. One of the things that I observe just so often is that as confidence falls, we naturally become more xenophobic. And so we need to recognize that if we are being xenophobic, if we're being exclusionary, that is a natural response to how we feel. We're not planning. Again, the future is uncertain. And so any sort of planning is going to be hard. It's going to be tenuous. It's not going to feel like we should be able to do that. We're also going to have a very hard time handling complexity. And it's one of the things that I've already been cautioning my students about, that cognitively, as we return to classes, every one of us, faculty, students, we're all going to be challenged in terms of our ability to handle complexity. We're naturally feeling unprepared, inexperienced, anxious, and at times overwhelmed. That is very, very predictable in times like this. It's also going to feel very tentative and sort of fitful, that we're going to be taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. Many things, if not everything, is going to feel like a struggle. I say these things not to scare or alarm you, but for you to realize that these are predictable. These are exactly what we should be expecting given where we are positioned today. I think it's important to recognize that we've been in that lower left quadrant, and we've been in that lower corner of that quadrant before. If you've experienced an injury, if you've lived through 9/11, the financial crisis, these are environments that are very, very similar to what we are living through today. Different causes, but same perceptions of intense vulnerability. I think it's also important to realize that this is an environment for now. If life has shown us, particularly in the last couple of decades, is these are environments that are short-lived. That sense of panic does not last. We do begin to move forward. We adapt. And so I think it's important as we are, sort of mantraing through this to remember, we've been here before. This is for now. Confidence will be restored. Anything where we feel it is new, unexpected, unprepared, we feel it's unfamiliar, is always going to be in that left-hand corner. I remind my freshmen, that's how they feel now. By the time they graduate, they will be in that upper right-hand box because things have become more familiar to them. I think it's really important for us not to extrapolate that the worst is yet to come. That's a very natural trend extrapolation that we experience in these moments, but it is so often inaccurate. Again, that sense that the worst is yet to come naturally and normally marks the lows. As I said, that headline to me doesn't frighten me. It actually makes me feel better about where we are, that the media has decided to report that that's how we feel. And I think that's one of the other important things to recognize. The media is following us in this experience. It's not that the media is making us feel worse. The media is an enormous mood mirror. It is reflecting our feelings with stories that confirm how we feel. It is playing Adele, rolling in the deep to us if we listen to it and leave it on. It's no different than just putting Adele on shuffle all day long. We are naturally responsive to media that resonates. And media companies know this. That's how they make money. And so recognize that those crisis, market, and turmoil specials only occur in moments like this. It's no different from the music of Adele. One of the things that I also think is vital in environments like this is that we don't compare. Don't compare ourselves to others. Don't compare ourselves to the person or individual that we were even just months ago. And let me highlight why. This is a chart of Google Trends for the word anxiety. And you probably never realized it, but it spikes on a regular cyclical basis every night, sometime between 1 and 2 in the morning. And I've looked at this on Christmas, I've looked at this on Thanksgiving, I've looked at this any number of times, and the pattern is always the same. Maybe a little less on Christmas, but it's always the same pattern. The spikes in the middle of the night. So why is comparison such a danger when we're feeling anxious? Well, look at the things we naturally Google when we are anxious in the middle of the night. Am I fat? Am I stupid? Am I ugly? We naturally are mean to ourselves, think the worst of ourselves in moments like this when we are highly anxious. And so I really encourage you to ignore your mean voice, to recognize that that voice that is telling you you are fat, ugly, whatever it is, insufficient, is the voice that only comes out when you are in that lower left-hand corner, that lower left-hand quadrant. That's not a voice that you typically heard just a few weeks ago. Our mean voice naturally comes out in that lower left-hand quadrant, and we need to recognize that. We are naturally overconfident when we have extreme perceptions of certainty and control. And it's not that we don't have confidence today. I would offer that we are naturally underconfident. It's not a word that is used, but I think it's a word that is really important in moments like this, because it's the same misperception of reality today versus the misperception that we have when we are overconfident. When we are naturally underconfident, things seem worse than they really are. So what can we do about it? And one other thing to think about, the importance of community in moments like this. It pains me that we have used the term, and we continue to use the term, social distancing. What's important here is not social distancing, but physical distancing. What's vital today is social closeness. And it's hard at a time when we are retreating and naturally seeking to be me here now to remember that these are the times when we need to do the extra effort to be inclusive and to be mindful of others in our communities. One of the things that is always fascinating to me in my work with confidence is how much helping someone else boosts our level of confidence, not just the person we're helping. When we help somebody, it means that we have certainty in what we're doing and we have control. And so I can't emphasize enough that in these moments, helping somebody else is in fact helping you when it comes to your own level of confidence. Finally, and since I'm talking to a William and Mary community, just a couple of things on communication during this environment, particularly in this lower left-hand quadrant. There's 6 rules to how we need to communicate when confidence is weak. A reminder to just be empathetic, make sure we're immediate. If people are in me here now mode, we need to be too as leaders. We need to be authentic, call it like it is. Messages need to be simple. If we're cognitively strained, remember that however we're communicating, make sure it's really easy to understand. Think about, how would I say this to a child or to a teenager in the workplace? That's probably the right mindset today. We need to be as complete as we can, and when we can't, to be open about the fact that more information will come as soon as we know it. And finally, we need to be transparent, that if there are things we don't know, again, to be upfront about that. Finally, and this is really counterintuitive, but as leaders, I encourage you to use the word I, not we. Your audience wants to know what you're going to do, not what they're going to do or you all are going to do together. Leaders who use the word I are sending a message that they are in charge, that they have commitment, and that they are being very deliberate in their actions. I don't want anyone to think that I am being Pollyannish, that this is, it's only going to be wonderful times and things are only going to be magnificent from here. I don't believe that, but I believe that the panic phase is coming to an end, that the lightning that we've been sensing is rolling down the aisle, and that eventually, slowly at first, but over time, confidence will be restored and we will again feel that sense of certainty and control that we felt just a few weeks ago. With that, I'm going to open it up to questions.
Thank you, Peter. Again, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function on Zoom here, and we will get those questions answered. We have about 10-15 minutes to answer the questions that you have for Peter. I have one question while we're waiting for those to roll in. Thinking about, I have a sense that we're all feeling a little anxiety. Students, families, and now students are most likely home with their families in most cases. How can we as families support our students when we ourselves are feeling this sense of this lack of confidence or underconfidence?
It's really hard. This is an environment where the well is not, the well is dry, and we're being challenged to, step up and support folks. I think it's really important to be honest that, we're all feeling that same sense of vulnerability. And I would say to every student, who's on this, your faculty feels the same way you do. And so, please, the last thing any of us want you to be worrying about is, what's going to happen in terms of classes. Our expectations of you, and I hope your expectations of us, are changing. And we're going to have to figure this out. None of us has taught or learned in this environment before. And so, I think we need to recognize that this is going to be a process for parents and children, students and faculty, where we are all in this together. And again, one of the things that I really would emphasize is, don't extrapolate. If today is a bad day, don't extrapolate that tomorrow and the rest of the week is going to suck, because that's a false perception.
I have a question here. Is there a way to reduce the roller coaster of variable confidence?
Is there a way to reduce the roller coaster of variable confidence? I wish there was. I wish that we would temper our overconfidence, and I wish that we would temper our underconfidence. One of the things that I have found is that being moderately confident is very, very difficult. I think there is almost magnetic polarity to both underconfidence and overconfidence. We're going to find that this extreme low in confidence is really slow to recover from, because it feels like it's pulling us back into that lower left-hand corner, much like I think we felt attracted to that upper right-hand corner as confidence started to really improve. So I think we need to recognize and always sort of challenge ourselves about, am I being overconfident or underconfident, and to try to be somewhat objective about that. It's hard.
We have a couple questions kind of along the same vein. One is, how can we believe we're nearing the end of panic when the media has given predictions we might be enduring this until July? And the second question, which is similar, it's hard to feel that this is the most difficult time when we see all of the suffering in other countries.
So I have no idea how long this experience is going to last. But I would encourage folks to look at some of the videos, for example, that are coming from Italy, as people are learning how to adapt to this environment. What I think is coming to an end right now is the sense of dread and panic. How long it takes for the virus to trajectory to flatten, and for the outbreak to be curtailed in full, I don't pretend to know. But I do anticipate, and I think we're seeing it already, that individuals are beginning to figure out how to adapt to it. And so that adaptation, I think, reflects our core need to feel less vulnerable, to find ways to feel certainty and control where there is none. I expect that what you will start to see at a very small level is individuals, then families, then small towns and communities begin to recover well before there is a sense of recovery at a national level. Confidence is going to, as it always does, begins at an individual level. It's my perception that changes. And then over time, it becomes our perception. And so I expect the rebuilding process to occur at a very granular level first, and then it will begin to morph higher. Interestingly, in a very sort of similar but different way, in the same way we've seen this outbreak move in the opposite direction. Confidence will be restored in a viral manner. Small groups initially, and then ultimately you'll see a very large wave of confidence be restored.
I have a question here that I can answer, and then a couple more for you, Peter. Someone asked if we would be sending out a recording of this presentation. We definitely will, and I will get the slides from Peter and send those out with that email. So you can expect that most likely later today, maybe early tomorrow, pending what the day looks like. One question I have, do you have any predictions for the market?
I'm going to steer clear of that. Because the market will reflect mood. And so it would not surprise me that when the panic ends, there is a sense of relief that is reflected in the markets. That does not mean that the markets can't or won't go lower. If you were to go back and look at what happened to the financial markets after Lehman Brothers failed, the financial markets did continue to go lower. And so what I would say is the markets will mirror how we feel. Markets are a barometer of mood. It's not that the stock market is making us feel worse. It is that the fact that we feel worse is being reflected in the markets today. And so I would just say to anyone in terms of the markets, recognize that they will act the same way we do in terms of confidence. Confidence is forward-looking. The markets are forward-looking. In my class, we use the markets a lot as a measuring stick. And I think that for those folks who are interested, that to me would be, one of the ways to measure confidence using a proxy. But I am not, in none of the work that I do I talk about the price levels on the markets. All I'm focused on is what is sentiment suggesting about where are we? And what sentiment is suggesting to me today is that we are nearing the end of the panic phase of this crisis.
Thank you for that perspective. We have one last question. I viewed a legislator's webinar yesterday about what is being done in my state to contain the virus. It was very encouraging and boosted my confidence. How does being informed relate to confidence?
Being informed is important because it gives us a sense of certainty. It also gives us a sense of control, albeit through the behavior of others. We take great comfort in knowing that others are acting on our best interest, and are trying to aggressively, fight the crisis. I think that what we are seeing, as is so often the case in these kinds of crises, is extraordinary local leadership. Mayors, countymen, state governors. This is a me here now crisis that needs to be and has to be fought on a me here now level. And so I think I would encourage you to encourage your local officials to be highly visible. One of the things that we've seen with other outbreaks, whether it was the AIDS epidemic, a lot of the work in terms of anti-vaccination movements, the most powerful voices today are people who are familiar to us, people who are local, people who we trust. These are moments where folks from the pulpit or from whatever the local platform is can be immensely influential to our behavior. Nobody cares today, for example, what the World Health Organization thinks of this crisis. The crisis for each of us is at a local individual level. And so the more we can take comfort from our local leaders, the better off the well-being will be in our communities.
All right, well, that is our webinar today. Thank you everyone for those wonderful questions. And thank you again, Peter, for spending your time with us today and adjusting your presentation. I myself found it extremely helpful, and I think it eased my anxiety a little bit, and hopefully our families feel the same. So thank you again for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. And we look forward to sending out the recording of this presentation. Thank you all.